You know, there's a small miracle in the book, or maybe not so small, but you can't discount miracles, because my uncle Bert Cohen, who was an immense figure in my life and who died last year, and at the age of 95, he signed up for the Allied forces in Johannesburg, went to Egypt, sailed to Taranto in early 1944, and fought the whole Italian campaign with the Allies. And he was an amazing man. He became a professor of dentistry. But one thing I realized through his diaries was that he'd toyed very seriously with becoming a writer. And actually, the last thing he did before he died was to read through the manuscript and, as usual, correct my spelling mistakes. So that was good. But anyway, speaking of miracles, he was in Florence in 1944, and he was reconnoitering some site just outside Florence, and this little bird came along and landed on his shoulder. And the bird stayed there for 6 days. And he would walk around Florence with this bird on his shoulder, and the Florentines thought he was a saint, this young Jewish captain in Florence. And so they would come up to him and say, "Ma lei è un santo, and they wanted him to bless their children. So he tried to recall the old mnemonic, spectacles, testicles, wallet, cigar, but he got it wrong a few times. Anyway, about 4 days into this remarkable saga, he encountered a US officer in the streets of Florence, and who came up and said, "Say, Captain, you've got a bird on your shoulder." And he said, "Yeah, I know, it's been there for 4 days." He said, "Holy shit, 4 days? Do you mind if I take a photograph?" But I said, "No, that's fine." So there's a photo at the end of chapter 1 of my Uncle Bert with his bird on his shoulder. And actually I'll read just, I'll show you.
So it's on page, it's on page 28.
It's on page 28. I mean, you can't, if you have the book, you can look on page 28. But anyway, at the end of the book, I'll just read this passage because it's really rather extraordinary. Yeah, so then in his diary I found this, this is right at the end of the book. "Not 5 minutes," this is my Uncle Bert writing, "not 5 minutes after the photograph had been taken, my bird took off and flew across the river that, as the photograph shows, is at least as wide as the Thames at Westminster. I watched it as it flew southward." He called the bird Ishbel, by the way. "I watched it as it flew southward without so much as a backward glance. And in less than a minute it was out of sight. I stood, dumbfounded, and waited for several minutes before resuming a lonely walk along the right bank of the Arno. I felt bereft. Some 15 minutes later, as I approached the Lucchese, I was looking out over the river when I saw a bird flying in my direction. Unbelievably, it alighted on my left shoulder. 'Where on earth have you been?' I asked angrily, but without being able to suppress my elation. To this day, the question remains unanswered." So, while I'm not religious, I think one has to be at least somewhat mystical and concede that miracles do happen.